y'all, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Stephanie and I appreciate y'all stopping by. In today's video, I have 6 brand new fall themed decor DIYs to share to kick off the 2024 fall season. Let's go ahead and jump right in. For this first project, I started with one of these square signs that I picked up at the Dollar Tree and started by removing the hanger and the paper from the front. I then took some matte Mod Podge and gave the front of the sign one good coat and set it aside to completely dry. Once that was dry, I took some of this medallion embossed ivory scrapbook paper that I picked up at Hobby Lobby and traced around the front of the sign and cut it to size. Once I had it trimmed up, I placed it on the front of the sign with the Mod Podge, making sure that it was flush with the edges, then took a piece of parchment paper and placed it on top and used my heat press mini to reactivate the Mod Podge and adhere it to the sign. I did make sure to pay extra close attention along the edges to make sure that they were good and adhered so that they would not peel up. Once I was completely satisfied that the paper was thoroughly adhered, I went ahead and took a finger sander and went around all of the edges to remove any excess paper to give it a nice clean finished look and set it aside. I then took one of these wooden cutouts from the Dollar Tree and removed the little raffia bow from the stem, then took Waverly Antique Wax and stained the outside portion of the leaf. Next, I used some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint the center. Once that was dry, I took some matte Mod Podge and gave the center of the leaf one even coat and set it aside to dry. Once that was dry, I took a sheet of this gold fall leaf vellum that I picked up at Hobby Lobby and placed it down on the center of the leaf along with a piece of parchment paper, and again took my mini heat press and went over the top to reactivate the Mod Podge and adhere it to the leaf. Again, I paid close attention to the edges so that it was fully adhered. Next, I took a sharp X-Acto knife and carefully went around the raised edges of the leaf to remove any of the excess vellum to give it a nice clean finished look. Now that I had both of these pieces complete, I went ahead and used a generous amount of hot glue to attach the leaf diagonally across the front of the sign. Next, I used one of these brown paper tags that I had in my stash and took some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and heavily dry brushed it. Once that was dry, I took a pencil and lightly sketched out the words Crunchy Leaves in a script font, then used a dark black ink pen to fill it in. Once that was finished, I took a piece of jute twine and fed both ends through the hole on the top of the tag, then back through the loop that it created to create a large head knot. Once I had that done, I went ahead and tied both ends of the jute together in a knot to create a hanger. Next, I used some hot glue to attach the tag to the center of the leaf at an angle, and some more hot glue to attach the knot over the hole in the stem to cover it up. At this point, I decided that this piece needed a little something extra, so I went ahead and took this floral pick that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby and cut all of the stems apart. Now, when I'm doing my floral arrangements, I always start by cutting all of the stems apart and doing a dry fitting to see exactly how I want the pieces to lay and what pieces I want where. Once I was happy with the placement of the arrangement, I went back and started using hot glue to attach them to the stem of the leaf. I did make sure to put some of the stems up underneath the jute cord so that it looked like it was intertwined and meant to be there. I went ahead and did all of my florals on the left side of the leaf first, then mirrored what I did on the left on the right so that it looked nice and cohesive. To finish up this project, I took some of this brown ribbon that I got on sale at Hobby Lobby and created a simple bow using some jute twine to tie it in the center and used hot glue to attach it to the center of the florals at a diagonal, and that's it for this one. Y'all, I absolutely love how this one turned out. For this project, I started with this 12 by 12 wood canvas that I picked up in the plus section at the Dollar Tree and started by using Waverly Antique Wax to stain the sides and the back. I also used this piece of scrapbook paper that I picked up at Hobby Lobby. I placed the paper in the back of the canvas, then ran my fingernail along the edges with the excess paper so that I would have a guide of where to cut. Once I had the excess paper removed, I applied a thin layer of Mod Podge to the back of the canvas and applied the paper on top. I worked in sections, applying a little bit of Mod Podge at a time and making sure to smooth out all of the lumps and bumps. Next, I took this 5x7 canvas that I picked up in a pack at Hobby Lobby and used a flathead screwdriver and some pliers to remove all of the staples on the back so that I could take the canvas off of the frame. Once I had the canvas off the frame, I set it aside and used a flathead screwdriver and a hammer to recess the staples in all four corners on the front side of the frame. Once all the staples were recessed, I took some Waverly antique wax and stained just the front and sides of the frame. Next, using the cream fabric side of the canvas, I placed the frame in the middle and traced around the inside. I traced this Fall Sweet Fall off of my computer and shaded in the back with a pencil to create a transfer. I placed it in the center of the canvas and used tape to hold it in place. Next, I took a pen and traced around the letters to transfer them onto the fabric. Once I had the words transferred, I used folk art paint in the color Pueblo and a fine tip paintbrush to paint them. Once that was dry, I used hot glue to reattach the canvas to the frame and then used a sharp utility knife to remove the excess fabric. Once I had the excess removed, I used hot glue to attach the 5x7 frame to the right corner of the larger canvas. I then took two pieces of scrap foam board and sketched out a candy corn shape on each of them, making sure that they were roughly the same size. To cut them out, I used a sharp utility knife with a brand new blade and first scored along the drawn line with a light amount of pressure and then went back along the same line with more pressure to fully cut through the foam. I continued to work in small sections until I had all of the excess foam board removed and the shape cut out. When working with foam board, this is a step that really makes the magic happen. Once I had the shape completely cut out, I took a finger sander and sanded around the entire outside edge to remove any of the excess paper and to smooth out the edges. I then repeated these steps to cut out and sand the second candy corn. I used Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle, folk art paint in the color Pueblo, along with Waverly chalk paints in the color Plaster and Ink to paint both candy corn. Once the paint was dry, I used antique wax to lightly distress the fronts and sides of both pieces. I also used the antique wax to stain 2 cubes and 1 tumbling tower block off from the Dollar Tree. Once everything was completely dry, I used hot glue to attach the 2 cubes to the back of one piece of the candy corn and the tumbling tower block to the back of the other piece. Next, I used hot glue to attach the piece of candy corn with the tumbling tower block to the left side of the canvas, just a little bit higher than the sun, facing the left corner. I then used hot glue to attach the other piece of candy corn just below the first piece, facing the right corner. I then took 8 of these antique bronze book corners that I picked up on Amazon and placed 1 in each of the 4 corners on the smaller frame, as well as 1 in each of the corners on the larger frame, and used hot glue to secure them in place. If you're interested in picking up some of these book corners, I will leave a link in my description box below to my Amazon storefront where I have them linked. To finish up this project, I used 2 of these raffia bows that I picked up in this package on sale at Hobby Lobby and used hot glue to attach 1 to the bottom of the bottom candy corn and 1 to the top of the 5x7 frame, and this project is done. This piece turned out absolutely adorable, and it's just enough rustic charm that it goes with my decor perfectly. For this project, I used this hanging wood round that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I started by taping off the bottom section with some painter's tape and used Waverly antique wax to stain it and the sides. Once that was dry, I taped off the middle section and used Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster to paint the middle and the sides. Once that was completely dry, I went ahead and taped off the top section and used Waverly chalk paint in the color pumpkin to paint it. Now I did go ahead and finish off the back of this wood round with some Waverly antique wax. Once all the paint was completely dry, I took this iron-on transfer that I got from Temu and placed it in the center of the wood round, followed by a piece of parchment paper, and used my heat press mini to transfer it over. Once I had the image transferred, I let it cool for just a few minutes and went ahead and carefully peeled off the transfer tape. Once I had the tape off, I went ahead and burnished over the image. Here you can see that the stock number on the transfer did end up transferring as well, but it was easy to remove by rubbing it off with my finger. Once I had that removed, I went ahead and took this outside and gave it 2 coats of this Mod Podge Gloss Clear Acrylic Sealer, letting it fully dry between the coats. After it was completely dry, I used a piece of jute twine to create a hanger. I fed one end of the jute through the back side of one of the holes at the top and tied a knot in the front to secure it in place. I then repeated this step to attach the jute to the other side. Once I had both sides attached, I did go back with my hot glue gun and add a dab of hot glue to the back of each of the knots for a little added security, and cut off the excess. I then took this 1.5-inch brown ribbon that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby to make a bow off camera, and then used hot glue to attach it to the upper right side of the sign by the hanger. I did end up using hot glue to hold the 2 bottom loops in place so that it did not cover up the words. Then, to finish up this project, I took this fall pick that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby and cut off a leaf stem and a double berry stem for each side of the bow and used hot glue to secure them in place right underneath the loops, making sure to put the leaves underneath the berries, and that's it for this one. I think this turned out absolutely adorable, and I can't wait to put it on my door this fall. For this project, I used this cutting board that I had in my stash that originally came from the Dollar General and started by removing the hanger along with the paper from the front. I then took some Waverly antique wax and stained everything except for the raised portion. Once that was completely dry, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint the center section. I traced this pumpkin spice latte recipe from my computer and used a piece of carbon paper to transfer it to the middle of the cutting board. I placed the carbon paper down first with the shiny side facing down and placed the recipe on top using some Scotch tape to secure it in place. I then took an ink pen and traced over all of the words to transfer them onto the front of the cutting board. Once I had the recipe transferred, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and watered it down quite a bit, along with Waverly chalk paints in the color pumpkin, fern, and truffle, and a small paintbrush to paint it, and set it aside. I then took this plain brown paper coffee cup and used a utility knife to cut it in half using the seam as a guide. Next, I took this scrap piece of round floral foam and placed it just inside the top of the cup right below the lip and took a pen and marked it and cut it to size. I then used hot glue to attach it to the inside of the cup just below the lip. Once I had the foam in place, I used hot glue to attach the cup to the cutting board, making sure that it was sitting flush with the bottom. Next, I took this orange puff paint from Walmart and added it to the front of the cup right under the lip, making sure to add some drips and set it aside to dry. While that was drying, I took one of these plain straws and cut 2 smaller straws out of it, making sure one of the straws was just a little bit longer than the other one. I then took this light brown washi tape and used it to add straps to each of the straws, making sure to tuck it in on each end. Next, I took one of these small wooden pumpkins from this variety pack that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paints in the color pumpkin and truffle to paint the front and back. Once the puff paint was dry, I used some of this caulk from the Dollar Tree along with an icing tip to create the whipped cream. I made sure not to cover up any of the recipe and that all of the styrofoam was covered. I will say that I don't know if it's due to the heat and humidity down here because it's been really hot, but for some reason the caulking was shrinking as it was drying. So if you recreate this, I would advise you to make the whipped cream just a little bit taller than I did. While the caulking was still wet, I went ahead and added the 2 straws off to the left side so that they would be firmly held into place once it was dry. I also added some ground cinnamon to the top of the whipped cream, followed by the wooden pumpkin in the center, then set it aside to dry for several hours. I took some of this pumpkin ribbon and this orange gingham ribbon, both that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby, and created 2 simple bows and dovetailed the ends. I also took one of these medium-sized pumpkins from this pack that I picked up at Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paints in the color pumpkin and truffle to paint the front and back. Then, to finish up this project, I used hot glue to attach the pumpkin bow to the base of the handle, followed by the orange gingham bow, and then the pumpkin, and this one is finished. I think this turned out absolutely adorable and is going to look perfect on my coffee bar, although I wish the whipped cream was just a little bit taller. For this super quick project, I used one of these cinnamon scented brooms that I picked up at the Dollar General, along with 1 whole roll and about a half another roll of this fall ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I started by wrapping the ribbon around the top of the handle where it is tied with a jute and cut it to size. Once I had it cut to size, I flipped the broom over and used hot glue to attach the ribbon to the top of the handle to cover up the jute. I also made sure that the original hanger was free and that the seam was on the back side. I then repeated this step to cover up the 2 wrap sections below the hanger, and I did go ahead and fold the ribbon under on the back side for a clean and finished look. I would also highly recommend finger protectors for this step, as the hot glue does seem to seep through the ribbon. Off camera, I created this large bow that I lovingly refer to as my Franken bow, and used hot glue to attach it to the broom handle right in the center of the bottom wrap section. Now, I did not film the making of this bow because I still can't make a decent bow to save my life, so I have to glue all of my large ones together 1 loop at a time, hence why I call this my Franken bow. Once I had the bow in place, I fluffed it up just a little bit, and this quick little upgrade is finished. Y'all, I absolutely love how this little broom turned out. It is absolutely gorgeous and could not have gotten much easier. For this project, I used 3 of these Carvable foam pumpkins from the Dollar Tree and started by using Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint all 3 with 2 good coats as a primer. Once that was dry, I used folk art paint in the color Pueblo to paint one of the pumpkins with 2 good coats. Next, I used Ceram Coat in the color Straw to paint one of the other pumpkins. I left the last pumpkin the plaster color and took a pencil and sketched out a super cute scarecrow face, and then used Waverly chalk paint in the color Ink, folk art paint in the color Pueblo, along with Anita's acrylic paint in the color White to paint the face. Next, I used a utility knife to carefully remove the stems on the orange and yellow pumpkins. I took some of this raffia that I had in my stash and ripped the larger pieces down several times so that I would have several fine pieces to work with. And I do want to give a huge shout out to Kathy Jo from Kathy Jo's DIYs for this little tip, and I will leave a link to her channel in the description box below, so y'all be sure to go check her out. She is absolutely amazing. Once I had enough of the raffia ripped for my desired look, I added a generous amount of hot glue to the top of the yellow pumpkin and placed the raffia on top in a single layer, followed by the orange pumpkin. I then repeated this step to add more raffia to the top of the orange pumpkin, followed by the head of the scarecrow. Since I thought this little fellow could use some hair, I used hot glue to attach a thin layer of the raffia to the top of its head. Next, I took my scissors and trimmed up the raffia between the 3 pumpkins, making sure that it was a bit uneven so that it would look more natural. I then cut the hair just a little bit longer than the rest of the raffia just to tame it down a bit, and again made sure it was a little bit uneven so that it looked more natural. To make this little fellow's hat, I used one of these empty ribbon spools and started by cutting one end flush with the side and completely removing the other. Next, I used the end of a larger ribbon spool and placed it down on some scrap cardboard, then traced around it with a pencil and cut it out to make the brim of the hat. I then used Waverly chalk paint in the color sandstone to paint both pieces to cover up any of the words. Once that was dry, I used some of this burlap to cover the hat brim. I laid the circle on the piece of burlap and traced around it with a pencil, then cut it out. Once I had the piece cut out, I used a small amount of hot glue around the edge of the cardboard and around the hole in the center to adhere it to the hat brim. I would highly recommend using finger protectors for this part of the project. Next, I took some small scissors and made small cuts along the burlap hanging over the edges and used hot glue on the other side of the circle to secure it in place to cover all the edges for a nice clean finished look. I then cut out another circle from the burlap and used hot glue to attach it to the other side of the circle. This time I used some scissors to cut off any excess that was hanging over the edges and to open up the hole in the center. I also went ahead and used this burlap to cover the ribbon roll using 2 circle pieces to cover the hole on the side that is now the top of the hat. When I had both pieces covered, I used hot glue to attach the top of the hat to the brim. Now that the hat was finished, I went ahead and placed it on the scarecrow's head over the stem, and it fit like a glove, so I did not need to add any glue. Next, I took some of this thin brown ribbon that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby and wrapped it around the top of the hat using hot glue to secure it in place with the seam on the back side to create the hat band. I then took one single flower off of each of these picks that I got on Temu and 2 leaves off of this scrap piece that I had in my stash and created a small arrangement using hot glue to hold it all together, and then used more hot glue to attach it off to the right side of the hat. To finish up this project, I took one of these raffia bows from this pack that I got on sale at Hobby Lobby and used hot glue to attach it to the front of the scarecrow at the top of the orange pumpkin, and this little fellow is done. I know this is not my typical projects, but I think he turned out absolutely adorable and he was just for funsies. And that's it for all of today's projects. I hope y'all really enjoyed this video, and if you would, please leave me a comment down below and let me know which one of these projects is your favorite. I think mine is probably the Hello Pumpkin door hanger. If you liked this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I have a bunch of fun projects on the way for the upcoming fall, Halloween, and Christmas seasons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.